Psychiatry for a Mad World. An extract from the book. As an aside, I studied the link between psychosis and intelligence. It is often said that genius is close to madness. It is clear to me now that there is a link. Intelligence is a lot to do with spotting patterns, which is what I had to do when I took the Mensa test. I did quite well since coincidence spotting had become my forte, though at times I wish it hadn't. Before I took the test, I came off the antipsychotics for a couple of days, since I concluded that if they reduced my ability to spot patterns, they would reduce my IQ. But it is interesting to contemplate that acquiring this psychotic pattern spotting could actually have increased my IQ. A mental illness which might increase intelligence. It's another blurred boundary between mental illness and health. Having said that, people say genius is close to madness, often because it is a way that they can persecute the truths which geniuses reveal. I am not saying I am a genius. Misconceptions about schizophrenia. As a general rule, I don't mention my experiences of mental illness, especially of psychosis, to people I meet because I am well aware of the stigma attached to the issue. People who don't understand mental illness may be afraid of mentally ill people or may otherwise in some sense look down on them. Danny, the man I mentioned in Chapter 2 who was sectioned with schizophrenia, has suffered from stigma on numerous occasions. Like the illness psychosis, schizophrenia brings with it scary images of crazed axe murderers. Why? Well, partly that is down to the media. Very occasionally a person with schizophrenia does attack someone, and what kind of headlines do we see in the papers then? Answer, something like, "Schizophrenic murders pensioner." So we are given a skewed perception of schizophrenia by the news, as it is only the dangerous schizophrenic people who become newsworthy. All the peace-loving schizophrenic people like Danny will be doing everyday things like watching telly, going to the shops or working, and they won't be noticed. The British National Health Service, NHS, acknowledges that there is a degree of linkage between violence and schizophrenia, but cautions, quote, "The media tend to exaggerate this, with acts of violence committed by people with schizophrenia getting a great deal of high-profile media coverage. This gives the impression that such acts happen frequently when they are in fact very rare." End quote. So the maps in the minds of the ordinary folk reading those headlines begin to drift away from reality. In other words, there is a mental disorder in the minds of the people who create the stigma. Again, is it the people with schizophrenia who are the really ill ones, or everyday people who think they are completely healthy? There is no them and us. The NHS website goes on to say, quote, "A person with schizophrenia is far more likely to be the victim of violent crime rather than the instigator." End quote. Experts at the Royal College of Psychiatrists estimate that if schizophrenia could be cured overnight, the rate of violent crime in England would only drop by 1%. Violent crime is usually the result of entirely different illnesses, sometimes personality disorder, which we will be looking at shortly. Violent crime may also come from people who are suffering anger, something which can afflict anyone, including people who consider themselves perfectly healthy. Regarding the skewed headlines, Danny quite rightly pointed out that you would not read the headline, "Diabetic murders pensioner." He points out that it was decades ago that it became illegal to write something like, "Pensioner murdered by a black." That, of course, would be racial prejudice. But clearly the laws of the land, or even everyday political correctness, have not gone all the way to rid our minds of prejudice against people with mental illness. And it isn't just the sensationalist tabloids that are guilty of proliferating stigma and destructive stereotypes. Danny also complains about the UK's highly respected radio station, BBC Radio 4, where a news presenter referred to an organisation as being schizophrenic, implying that it had a split personality. This is another common misconception. Schizophrenia has nothing to do with having a split personality. That is something more akin to multiple personality disorder. People with schizophrenia may have hallucinations from any of the five senses and will often hear voices. They may have delusions, paranoia, or disorganised thinking. Other symptoms may include becoming socially withdrawn, experiencing a lack of emotions, inability to enjoy things which were previously enjoyed, apathy, and becoming increasingly uncommunicative. Split personality doesn't come into it. So again, there was a delusion inside the mind of that radio presenter, an ordinary man who probably perceived himself as mentally healthy. Again, there is no them and us regarding mental illness.